Robert Daly is director of the Wilson Center's Kissinger Institute on China and the United States. He joins us today to discuss the relationship between China and North Korea. Robert, welcome back. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So, on some scale of closest ally in the world to most hated enemy, where does the relationship fall between China?
Well, China doesn't have any true allies. In fact, they have a policy of non-alliance. But they have been really, since the Korean War, as the Chinese phrase goes, as close as lips and teeth. That's the way that they describe it. They fought together, obviously, against us and the South Koreans from 50 to 53, and they were ideological comrades right along, and China is North Korea's lifeline. So they are closer to North Korea by far than any other nation, but they have drawn away in recent years. So China's leverage is greater than anyone else's, but we shouldn't exaggerate it. There are also limits on China's love for North Korea.
What was the cause of the drawing away?
A lot of it was a drawing closer to South Korea because of economic interests, but also some of the same concerns about the Kim regime that we have, and this is particularly true under Kim Jong-un, who the Chinese are embarrassed by, appalled by. Early in his tenure, the Chinese pitch to North Korea was, what you really need to do is do what we did. Keep your political system, but open up economically. This was what China had to offer. And that, while different from our prescription, we'd really prefer regime change, peaceful regime change. They were looking for an evolution along their own lines. But that may have been the best idea for North Korea that it could actually take on, but it didn't. It rejected China's idea and has continually made it clear that it marches to its own tune. And now it has also deeply embarrassed China.
So those in the United States who think China needs to just lean on North Korea and has significant influence on North Korea's behavior, they have it wrong?
They don't have it altogether wrong. China does want a denuclearized peninsula, which is what we want, but it's not all that we want. And China's view of how that would happen is quite different than ours, and China is not willing to take North Korea off of life support. So no sanctions regime, whether it comes out of the United Nations, whether it comes out of the United States Congress, is going to bring Korea to its knees because China is right there. China's equities in North Korea are different than ours, and they're legitimate from China's point of view. They are, very concerned about a large wave of North Korean refugees that they can't handle coming across their border. And they are also concerned about having a United States ally that stations American troops on the Yalu River on their border. This is something up with which they shall not put. So they are not going to allow any sanctions regime that cripples Kim Jong-un.
Does China view North Korea as a security threat in terms of the fact that this is a nuclear nation that is fairly unstable, at least by many international standards? Do they view them as a threat to their own security?
Since North Korea, its fourth nuclear test a little over a month ago, and then the launching of a new intercontinental ballistic missile style vehicle, which they said was to launch a satellite, but it's the same technology. It has become clear that while China would prefer that they not be nuclear, China is more concerned about the United States' relationship with South Korea and the United States putting a new THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense system in South Korea than they are about North Korean provocations in the first instance. So it's another imbalance between the United States and China.
Now, recently the United States has asked China for a lot of help to put more and more pressure on North Korea, sanctions, other measures, and the Chinese reaction has been
lukewarm at best. Notably, Xi Jinping said nothing, absent for about a month after the nuclear test. No, after the nuclear test, he said nothing. And when he finally spoke, it was more to express concerns about South Korea and the United States than about North Korea. So it's become clear, I think, for a long time we had the sense that China's a close ally, they're a supporter. The road to Pyongyang lies through China. We're going to let them lead on this. That has failed. It has become clear that while we have some commensurate interests, they're not wholly commensurate. So while we need to seek a solution in Korea that is ultimately accepted by China, it would be destabilizing to try to do something that China was strongly opposed to as a final set of circumstances. And we have to work with China as closely as possible. It doesn't mean we don't have to be with them every step of the way. We can have the work with China track, but we've also got the working with our allies, South Korea and Japan track, the UN track, and then the United States working on its own through the sanctions which Congress has passed, which Obama will probably sign. China doesn't like this. China doesn't like sanctions, and China deeply dislikes new American missile deployments there. And I think the mood in Washington right now says, that's okay. You can dislike it for a while. Damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. Damned if we don't hasn't worked. Let's try damned if we do on for size and see what it gets us.
Now, recently, China has suggested that the U.S. and North Korea need to talk. Right. Have they offered to mediate these discussions? Is there any likelihood of something like this actually occurring?
The Chinese had been the leaders of what had been called the six-party talks. The six parties being the two Koreas, China, the United States, Japan, and Russia, which North Korea walked out of. And it had been primarily a talk shop prior to that for several years. It had some accomplishments, incremental agreements, but none of which ultimately stopped North Korea from developing nuclear weapons. China wants a return to the table, and they continue to say that there need to be discussions. I don't think that they're entirely wrong in this. Ultimately, there's going to have to be some kind of mediated settlement if there's not a violent settlement of some kind. And I've been struck working more on the China side than the North Korean side now, but for almost 30 years, that we're in a position that we've in part put ourselves into, where at every crisis point with North Korea, we would have been better able to manage it had we established some kind of mechanism or relationship with them 5 or 10 years earlier. Mm-hmm. Clearly this is the case. But at any given moment, this Washington logic of we cannot speak to them because we'll be rewarding their bad behavior, this seems to dominate. We do need to speak with them, not to reward them. It's not for them. It's for us and for our South Korean allies. So yes, we do need to find some way of having a dialogue mechanism because we need to know these folks better. And it's going to take a long period of time. But again, it's not for us. We need to stop it's not for them. We need to stop telling ourselves this story that it rewards them. It is in the long term conducive to peace for all, and that's for us. So we need to change a little bit of our own narrative as well.
One final thought, Robert, on the list of priorities for China as it looks out at the world. Is North Korea high on the list, or is it a minor annoyance that flares up from time to time? How does it sit in China's view of the world?
Well, it had been a minor annoyance for a while, but now it is front and center. Not because they have the nuclear weapons, but because Xi Jinping's careful work with South Korea has now been undone, practically overnight by this test. He's been a very active diplomat. He has been to South Korea. In fact, he's never been to North Korea, but he went to South Korea early in his tenure. Park Geun-hye, the president of South Korea, was one of the few leaders from an allied or Western country that actually went to Xi Jinping's big military parade last summer. That has gone very well. So now all of a sudden South Korea is back, not exactly warming up to Japan, but working with Japan, working with the United States, and clearly in President Park's recent speech, consigning Chinese and Russian concerns to a tertiary level. We need to defend ourselves. We need to work very closely with our ally, the United States. We need to work within the U.S. South Korean Japanese framework, and we're also interested and concerned with Russia's and China's views. So all of that has been undone. It is related to increased American power in the northern part of the Western Pacific. It's not wholly unrelated to what's going on in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. So if you're Xi Jinping, this is still bringing more American capability into the area, and it's strengthening American alliances.
Thanks again for joining us, and thanks for shedding some light on this very interesting and important relationship.
Thank you.